It was the air that struck me first, that dry, almost granular taste of time left untouched. I felt it coat the back of my throat as I stepped inside the archive, the scent of rotting parchment and mold lingering in my nostrils like an old, unshakable memory. My fingers, still curled around the cold brass handle of the door, hesitated. The hinges behind me gave a protesting groan, and the sound seemed to ripple through the narrow stone hall beyond, as if awakening something slumbering in the dark. I had been invited, no, lured, by a letter whose parchment was brittle enough to suggest centuries, yet whose handwriting was oddly fresh, ink black as if it had been set to the page just hours before. There had been no sender, only a single instruction in sharp script. The truth you seek sleeps in the Candler Archive. Come alone. The Candler Archive was not on any university map, nor in the dusty indexes of our historical society. It existed only in rumors traded between obsessive antiquarians, the kind who collect not just relics but secrets. I specialize in ancient ritualistic practices, binding circles etched in ash, chants that survive only in the margins of forgotten texts, the ways primitive societies flirted with their gods in blood and fire. My interest had always been academic, detached. I could diagram a sacrificial rite without so much as a twinge of discomfort. But as my leather boots carried me over the uneven flagstones, I felt the first shiver of something unfamiliar. The corridor narrowed until my shoulders almost brushed the walls. The stone was clammy, the mortar damp beneath my fingertips. Somewhere ahead, the faint amber glow of a lamp pulled in a doorway, its light distorted by a wavering heat. Inside, the archive opened like a cavern, its ceilings arched and ribbed with blackened beams. Wooden shelves sagged beneath the weight of manuscripts bound in every shade of decay. A single desk stood at the room's center, its surface cluttered with objects I could not yet identify. Something glinted faintly among them. I set my satchel down, its straps sliding over my shoulder with a whisper of worn leather, and removed my gloves. My fingers itched to touch the nearest stack of books, though the thin film of dust suggested no one had done so in decades. That was when I noticed it. The dust seemed disturbed, but not in the obvious swipes of human hands. More like the subtle patterns of something dragged slowly across the wood. The manuscripts were varied, some in Latin, others in scripts that teased at my memory but refused recognition. I leafed through one and was immediately drawn to the illustrations, spiraling sigils whose symmetry was too precise to be decorative, surrounded by figures with limbs that bent in impossible ways. Their heads were featureless ovals, but from each radiated a halo of spines, like the quills of a sea urchin. As I traced a finger near the ink, I felt, ridiculous as it sounds, a faint vibration. Not in the page itself, but in the air above it, as though the image hummed in some imperceptible frequency. I pulled back sharply, my chair creaking. It was then that I became aware of the sound. At first I thought it was a trick of the building, a loose shutter or the settling of timber. But the longer I sat, the more it resolved into something deliberate. Whispering. I turned. The corners of the archive were deep in shadow, far from the flicker of the oil lamp, yet I could swear the sound came from there. A low sibilance, the rise and fall of words in a language I did not know, though some part of me recognized. It made the hairs along my forearms stiffen, my mouth go dry. I told myself it was a draft catching the pages of some book, but when I looked, none stirred. Pushing the sound from my mind, I focused on the desk again. Among the scattered objects lay a bundle wrapped in a strip of stiff, blackened leather. When I unbound it, a smell rolled out, sickly sweet, like overripe fruit left to rot in a closed jar. Inside was a shard of obsidian carved with that same spined oval shape I'd seen in the illustrations. The stone was warm to the touch, unnervingly so, as though it had been held by someone moments before. And then the lamp guttered. The shadows lengthened, not merely in the natural way of dimming light, but as if they thickened, growing denser, creeping across the floor like ink spilled in water. I froze. From the black at the far edge of the room, something moved. Slow, deliberate. I could not see it, but I felt its passage, the way one feels a presence when they wake in the dark, knowing they are not alone. The whispering rose, threading through my skull now, bypassing my ears entirely. I clutched the obsidian without realizing it, my fingernails scraping the carved lines. And in that moment, a single phrase bloomed in my mind, clear as thought. "You found me." The air thickened, pressing at my chest, and my vision dimmed as though the shadows themselves drank the light. Somewhere behind me, the door groaned again, not opening, not closing, just breathing. And then the lamp steadied, and the shadows receded as if they had never moved at all. I sat in the chair for what felt like hours, my hands still locked around the shard. When I finally rose, my legs trembled. I placed the obsidian in my satchel. My fingers lingered on it a beat too long before I forced them away. I told myself I would leave then. I lied. I returned to the archive the following evening. I could pretend it was because of academic discipline, that the material was too compelling to abandon. But the truth, it was more primal. I couldn't stop thinking about the obsidian shard. About the whisper that had not passed through my ears. The shard sat in my study that night, resting on the edge of my desk like a pet rock carved by an obsessive hand. I had wrapped it in cloth, placed it in a drawer, even tried setting it in another room. Still, I woke twice in the dark, certain I had heard it shift, just a small scrape, like stone across wood. And so I returned. The air inside the archive was cooler this time, though the scent was the same, old pages steeped in mildew, the musk of animal skin bindings, and beneath it, that same sweet rot perfume from the shard. I began with the pile of books nearest the desk, brushing dust from their spines. Most were brittle, their leather flaking under my touch. It wasn't until I reached the third stack that I found it, a manuscript bound not in leather, but something pale and too smooth. I didn't like how it gave slightly when I pressed it, as though resisting me. The cover bore no title, only the spined oval sigil burned into the surface. My thumb traced the edges of the shape, the heat blooming faintly beneath my skin. Inside, the text was dense, the ink a deep brown that I suspected had not begun its life as ink at all. The script was unlike anything I had seen, a looping, serrated style, each letter a snare for the eye. Yet, disturbingly, my mind began to map patterns in it within minutes. "Don't look too long." The thought came from nowhere, and I startled, glancing around the room. Empty. Silent, save for the faint crackle of the lamp's wick. My fingers hesitated on the page, but the pull was stronger than my unease. I read on. The manuscript spoke of a god named only in symbols, a being that dwelt not in the heavens nor the underworld, but in the spaces between. It did not demand temples or altars, only notice. To be seen by it was to be claimed. The text described the rituals of its followers, gatherings in the new moon's dark, offerings of voice and marrow, the carving of the spined oval into bone and flesh alike. And something else, an initiation known as the waking. I didn't notice at first that my lips were moving as I read. The words were crawling out of me in a whisper, the syllables tasting strange on my tongue, like metal, like blood. I bit down on the sound, forcing my mouth shut. The lamp flickered again. From somewhere deeper in the stacks, a faint rustling began. Not the dry flutter of paper, but something heavier. Slow. Wet. I turned toward the noise. My eyes strained against the dimness, trying to parse shapes from shadow. There, between two leaning shelves, I caught the impression of movement. A figure, perhaps. Tall. Still. Watching. I blinked, and it was gone. When I looked back to the manuscript, the text on the page had changed. I could swear it had. The lines I'd been translating had shifted into a single block of script, tighter and darker, the strokes so deep they cut the page. I leaned in, the letters pulling my gaze down into their shapes. My breath slowed. The edges of my vision softened. The whispers began again. Not from the room this time. From inside. They used my own voice. "You've already begun the waking." I slammed the book shut, heart thundering, and in that instant, a sharp pain bit into my palm. I looked down. One corner of the manuscript had split the skin. Blood welled quickly, a bright drop sliding toward my wrist. Before I could wipe it away, it struck the cover's sigil. The heat flared instantly, hot enough to sting, and the blood soaked into the shape as if drawn deep inside. The shadows in the room shifted in unison. I left then. No methodical packing, no care for the dust I stirred. I grabbed the manuscript and the shard, shoving them both into my satchel, and fled through the corridor without looking back. But the whisper followed me. Not in the archive's stale air, this time, it was in the rhythm of my steps, in the pulse of blood in my ears. It sees you now. The manuscript and the shard sat on my desk that night, positioned precisely where I could see them, like a pair of predators lounging in plain sight. I had intended to lock them away, but the thought of turning my back on either filled me with a kind of crawling unease, as if they might rearrange themselves in my absence. My study was dim but warm, the single desk lamp creating a shallow pool of yellow light that bled into the surrounding dark. Outside, the city was muted, the occasional whoosh of a passing car sounding impossibly distant. I had the sensation of being submerged, my apartment an air pocket suspended in something deeper, thicker, less forgiving than night. The whispers had not stopped since I left the archive. They did not speak constantly, but they were there, an ambient presence, brushing the edges of my thoughts like fingers testing the threads of a net. Occasionally, they would form words. Questions, mostly. Do you hear it breathe? What is the taste of your shadow? I didn't answer. Not out loud. I busied myself with the manuscript. My rational mind was at war with my instincts. If I could translate it, break it down, make its content knowable, then perhaps I could dismantle the growing dread. Hours passed. The script no longer resisted me. My pen scratched across the page, mapping symbols to their closest phonetic equivalents, my hand steady despite the fact that every so often, a line of the text would seem to shift when I blinked. It was during one of these blinks that I noticed a mirror. There was only one in the study, a tall, narrow antique that leaned against the far wall. I had bought it years ago at an estate sale, drawn to the warped silvering in its glass. Its frame, a twisting mass of carved vines, was flaking gilt. I kept it here mostly out of habit. Now, it reflected me at my desk, the lamplight catching the curve of my shoulder, the downward tilt of my head as I wrote. My eyes were fixed on the manuscript, but in the reflection, my head was tilted slightly differently, the angle too sharp, my neck bent just beyond what was comfortable. I froze. The me in the mirror stopped writing. Slowly, very slowly, his head lifted, eyes locking directly onto mine. My throat tightened. The reflection smiled. I turned in my chair so quickly it screeched against the floorboards, but of course, there was nothing there. Only the mirror, and my own pale, unsettled face staring back at me in the correct position. When I turned back to my desk, the manuscript had shifted an inch to the left. The shadows in the corners of the room were thicker now. They seemed to bulge outward, as though pressing against some invisible membrane, straining to spill further into the light. That was when the whispering became a sound, something external, something with weight. It came from behind me, no, around me, like breath exhaled from every wall. The words were clearer than they had ever been. You're almost ready. I stood. My chair tipped, clattering to the floor. My pulse thundered in my ears as I crossed the room and reached for the lamp switch. My hand trembled. I missed it the first time. The moment the light died, the air changed, thicker, closer. The sound came again, but not as words this time. It was a wet, deliberate step. I flicked the lamp back on. Nothing moved. Nothing at all. But the mirror was different again. My reflection was gone. In its place was only the spined oval, black and impossibly deep, hanging in the glass like an open wound in the world. I don't remember moving, only that I suddenly stood at the mirror's edge, my breath fogging its surface. The shape pulsed once, and I felt it in my sternum, a deep vibration that made my teeth ache. My hand rose, my own, yet not mine, to touch the glass. The surface gave way like water. I yanked back before my fingers disappeared entirely, stumbling away so hard I hit the bookshelf behind me. The manuscript's pages fluttered open without a breath of air. Words spilled from it in that same not quite a language, loud now, urgent. The shard of obsidian on my desk trembled against the wood, then toppled onto the floor with a sound that rang far too long for its size. In the ringing, I heard a laugh. The shadows had stopped pressing from the corners. Now they were closer, sprawled across the floor in shapes that hinted at limbs and teeth. I grabbed the shard and the manuscript without thinking, shoving them into my satchel. My only thought was to get out. Out of the room, out of the apartment, out of the pull. But as I stepped into the hallway, the building felt wrong. Too quiet. Too still. The corridor seemed longer, the far wall lost in darkness that pulsed faintly, like the shape in the mirror. And somewhere in that darkness, something was waiting. The air in the hallway had a weight to it, as though it had been sitting for centuries in a sealed tomb. My footsteps were too loud, the echoes stretching unnaturally long down the narrow corridor. I could feel my heartbeat in my teeth. I kept my eyes forward, telling myself that the end of the hall was no further than it had always been, that the strange depth was just a trick of light. But with each step, the distance didn't shrink. The walls seemed to lean subtly inward, the floor slanting almost imperceptibly, as if guiding me towards something I couldn't yet see. I tried the nearest apartment door. Locked. The next, locked as well. No sound from within. No flicker of movement through the gaps. Just silence, thick enough to feel on my skin. Then I heard it. It wasn't footsteps. Not exactly. More like a dragging, a slick pull followed by a low, deliberate shift, as though something vast was moving along the hallway without the courtesy of legs. The sound came from behind me. I didn't turn. The dragging grew louder. I began to walk faster. The sound matched my pace, keeping just far enough away to remain unseen. My chest tightened. Halfway down the corridor, the lights began to fail, each bulb popping softly into darkness one after another, chasing me forward like the closing teeth of a trap. I ran. The satchel bounced against my hip, the obsidian shard thumping inside like a heartbeat. The manuscript's pages rustled without any draft, whispering to themselves in a language my mind was beginning to understand despite myself. Blood and shadow. Voice and marrow. My key was in my hand before I realized I'd even reached the stairwell. I jammed it into the lock, wrenched the door open, and stepped into. Not the stairwell. The space beyond was wrong. The air smelled of wet stone and something metallic, sharp and clinging to the back of my throat. The floor was not tile but uneven flagstone, slick under my shoes. And the light, what little there was, came from no single source, just a dim, colorless glow that seemed to rise from the very walls. The dragging sound was louder now. It was here, in this place. I backed up a step, but the door behind me was gone. My hand met only cold, sweating stone. Ahead, the hallway widened into a space I could not fully see. My breath fogged in the chill. And then, movement. It began at the edges. A ripple of shadow, too dense to be mere absence of light, spilling across the floor and up the walls. They merged toward the center of the chamber ahead, congealing into something vast. I could make out its outline only in suggestion, a bulk that hunched and swayed, too many limbs bending at wrong angles. Where its face should have been, there was only a single oval void lined with those same spines I had seen in the manuscript. The spines were not still, they flexed and trembled, releasing faint motes of darkness that drifted like ash. And then the mouth opened. It was not where a mouth should be. It split the void vertically, the edges peeling back in slow, wet strands, revealing nothing inside but black depth, black that seemed to pull at the light, at the air, at me. The sound it made was almost gentle at first, a wet inhalation, like something tasting the air. Then it spoke. You brought my name into your breath. The voice wasn't sound. It was inside my bones, vibrating through marrow. My knees nearly buckled. I stepped back, clutching the satchel to my chest like a shield. The shard inside was hot now, almost burning, and I had the strange sensation that it was answering. The thing moved closer. The dragging wasn't its limbs, it was the floor itself, folding toward it, as though reality was trying to close the distance on its behalf. The spines shivered again, and I realized each one ended in something wet and glistening, like the root of a tooth. One sacrifice. Will you open yourself, or shall I? The pull from its mouth grew stronger, dragging at my clothes, my hair, the moisture in my eyes. My skin prickled with the pressure. The manuscript throbbed against my ribs. A phrase flared in my mind unbidden, words from its pages, complete now, ready. I spoke them. I don't know why. I don't know if it was me. The air cracked. For an instant, the chamber folded in on itself, all angles and black light. The pull vanished. The thing hissed, not in pain, but in recognition. And then it laughed. Almost ready. The chamber's glow died, and I was standing in my apartment building's stairwell again, hands still on the doorframe, the sound of a distant elevator humming faintly above. But my satchel felt heavier. When I reached my apartment, the first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't the usual mix of old wood and faint cigarette smoke from my neighbor downstairs, it was the scent from the archive. That thick, sweet-rot perfume, clinging to the air as if it had seeped from the walls. My stomach tightened. I locked the door behind me, turned on every light I could, and set the satchel on my desk. My hand shook as I unfastened the strap. The shard was no longer smooth. Its surface had cracked along the carved oval, and through those fractures came a faint, pulsing glow, black, yet somehow luminous, as though it lit only the mind's eye. It was warm, almost feverish in my palm, and the longer I held it, the more I felt the warmth move through me, climbing up my wrist, curling into my chest. The manuscript lay beside it, open to a page I didn't remember reaching. The text had changed again. This time it was not in the cult script, but in English. My own handwriting. The sacrifice is the bridge. I backed away. My calves hit the edge of my chair and I sat hard, never taking my eyes from the desk. I tried to think logically. Burn it. Throw it into the river. Take it back to the archive and leave it there. But each thought felt thin, hollow. The whispering was louder now, not just around me, but inside me, threading through each beat of my pulse. It knows the weight of your soul. The lights flickered once. Twice. Then went out completely. Darkness closed in, thick and absolute. My apartment's familiar dimensions dissolved, the walls retreating, the air stretching thin. I could see only the shard's glow, pulsing in the dark like the last heartbeat of a dying star. Something moved between me and the glow. It wasn't the bulk I had seen in the other place. This was thinner, stretched tall, its joints bending with an insect's precision. Its head tilted in the dark, the spined oval where its face should have been flexing, shivering with breath. My muscles locked. I couldn't move. It took one step toward me. Then another. The floor didn't creak under its weight, it yielded, sinking slightly as if the thing pressed into reality rather than onto it. When it reached me, the spines opened. Inside, there was no mouth, no eyes, only a darkness deeper than anything I'd ever seen, and from that darkness came the pull. Not physical, not at first. It was my memories. My thoughts. Little things. The way my mother's voice cracked when she sang, the taste of rain on my tongue at 14, the smell of my father's books, slipping from me like strands of hair in water. I felt myself tilt forward. My hands rose. The pull became physical, dragging me toward the hollow in its face. My breath caught, my vision narrowing to a tunnel with only that darkness at the end. The last of my strength came in a ragged exhale. I reached into the satchel and grabbed the shard. It burned in my grip, the heat climbing instantly up my arm, burrowing under my skin. The creature stopped. Its head cocked again, almost curious. I didn't speak the words this time. I thought them, those same black syllables from the chamber. The shard split in my hand, light pouring out, searing my eyes and my mind. The thing before me shuddered. Its spines rattled like dry reeds. For a moment, I thought I had driven it back. Then it leaned closer. The bridge is built. And I understood. The shard was never a weapon. The manuscript was never a warning. They were the keys. I hadn't been resisting its call. I had been answering it all along. The pull intensified, and I felt something give way, not in my body, but in the fabric of the room itself. The floor fell away beneath me. The darkness in its face yawned wide, and I was falling, the whisper curling around me like smoke. Now you awake. They found my apartment empty 3 days later. The desk was bare, the lights still burning. No sign of forced entry. No sign of me at all. Only the mirror remained, leaning against the far wall, its surface a deep, unbroken black. If you stand in front of it long enough, they say, your reflection will begin to smile. And if you don't look away, you'll see me smiling back.